Voila, that's going there. And that's going there. And let's see if I'm. Hey. And we're hooked up. Looks like I don't have any. Well, I give a couple minutes for people to join in. There we go. I got people joining in. We're going to start in just a couple minutes, folks. Those of you here in the Zoom and those of you out in cyberspace, out on the social medias. Voila, technology. It's a wonderful thing. All right. Well, hello there, everyone. Paul Engel here once again with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and we teach a rising generation to be free. I'm glad everybody could join me. Those of you on the Zoom call, thank you very much. I was telling Tunnel beforehand, I do enjoy talking to people. And so if we can answer some questions on the Zoom, I do understand. Bobby says he doesn't have a microphone. That's fine. You know, I'm not going to force people to talk, but I think I find that the conversations are a lot easier to get into. Florida man, hey, Florida man, how you doing? So while people are still popping in, I want to thank everybody. I'm going to ask the people on Zoom, though, if you haven't muted your microphone, please do so. If you make noise, it kind of interrupts the video and, you know, does and all that. But I have no idea how many people are actually on the social media because the app that's supposed to tell me never seems to give me the right number. So if you're out there, I'm glad you could join me. I'm glad you can join us. Should be an interesting evening. I have a couple things to talk about. And as always, I have lots of time set aside specifically for discussions and answering questions. Speaking of questions, if you have a question and you're not on the Zoom, you can type your question into the comments. I will make a point of getting to them as we go through the night. I may not get to it right away, but I will try. If you want to become part of the Zoom call, you can go to the website, constitutionstudy.com, and you can sign up. You basically register for the event and you'll get an email with the link. Generally a day or two ahead of time, you get an email with a link to join the Zoom call. With that, let's see, what other things are going on? Oh, there's one other thing before I get started I wanted to mention. I was discussing this before. I have been invited to participate in a homeschool event in Spokane, Washington. Now, I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee. So if you look at a map, Nashville, Tennessee, and Spokane, Washington are not really near each other. So I've basically told the people I'd like to come, but I need to find some events to help defer the cost of travel. So if you are in the Pacific Northwest, if you have an event, this homeschool events April 30th and through May 1st, if you have an event up there that I could either, have a speaking engagement or an opportunity where I could sell my books, something to help justify the cost of heading to the Pacific Northwest, I would love the opportunity to do that. I've never actually been to that part of the country. I've never been to Washington, Oregon, Idaho. So it'd be nice to be up there. It'd be nice to meet some people. And I love the idea of going if I can help offset some of those travel costs. If you're interested, just contact me through either the websites, constitutionstudy.com, constitutionscholars.com. Contact me, let me know. And if I can make it happen, I'd love the opportunity to go up there. So that's kind of my ask. We'll talk more about some other things at the end of the program. But today I titled this, what did I title this? I don't even remember what I titled this. Ruled by Fear. That's it. Ruled by Fear. I grew up in a family of editors. I lived with words. I spent my entire childhood having my grammar corrected primarily by my father, which in a weird senses may give me a love for words. And I've heard a new phrase. I'm waiting for this to end up in the Oxford Dictionary. It's called fear porn. And it's this idea that, fear generates views. Fear generates action. In fact, there's a book I read many years ago called State of Fear by Michael Crichton. And the whole premise is you have an event, something you can generate fear over because that's how you control people. And boy, 2020 and 2021, we've lived in a state of fear. The American people have been ruled by fear. There's an old saying in the news media, if it bleeds, it leads. And it was always this idea that, anything that involved violence, anything that involved danger was always the lead story. The other one is what's called the man bites dog story. You never saw a news story about a dog biting a person. You only saw the story when the person bit the dog because it was odd. It was different. And I think we take those two together and we see that it's been taken to the extreme in the past year. We see people ruled by fear. I was in an airport in Minneapolis last year. This was, probably about August, I guess. And I saw a young couple, don't know who they are. They looked like they were in their mid to late 20s. They had masks on their faces. They had face shields. They had a stroller with two children in it. It looked like it was wrapped up in saran wrap. Except, well, it struck me because young people have the highest survival rate and children have the highest survival rate. And this wasn't at the beginning of the pandemic. This wasn't when nobody knew. This is when there were studies out. These are the people that were least at risk, but they were living in fear. I've met people who, I've known them for years. I've known them for decades. These are not what I would call a cowardly people. These were robust people. They were, like I said, they weren't ruled by, I wouldn't picture them being ruled by fear. I'd picture them, being on the brave side, but they're ruled by this fear. I see people who won't bring their groceries into the house till they've been doused in antiseptic. I see, parents that are terrified for their children. We have schools that aren't shut down, and it's all being led by this fear that is detached from the facts. It's it's a forced perspective. And I saw a couple articles that made me think about this. Excuse me. One was talking about some research done by Sarah Gilbert. She's a British vaccinologist and professor at the University of Oxford. And they were doing some, I guess they were looking at some of the deployment of vaccines and the importance of vaccines. And what we find is that the information about the danger of the vaccine, anything that said the vaccine was, the danger of the virus, anything that said the virus was bad got hyped all over the news. Anything that said, you know what, it may not be as bad as we think, well, it was all but disappeared. In fact, looking at one of these, a paper written by, the reason I brought this up is part of what Gilbert's research was talking about a vaccine and when it could be coming and how important it was. Well, it was about, the vaccine actually is going to come quicker than most people thought. That was not covered, at least not here in the US. But all the naysayers about you'll never get a vaccine, well, that was covered ad nauseum. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the article and I'm having a little hard time reading it. Let me zoom that in a little bit. You saw CNN on April 23rd had a quote from the English chief medical officer, saying that they probably wouldn't have a vaccine anytime soon. Anytime that calendar year, it would be incredibly small. And that was all over the news. But what Ms. Gilbert saying, no, we can actually probably have a vaccine by the end of the year, it wasn't covered. It seems like all the COVID news is bad news. Let's see. There was a paper written by a Bruce Sacerdote. I'm butchering his name. I'm sorry. Aranjal Segal and Amali Cook. They're from Dartmouth College and Brown University. And what they actually did is they looked at the news articles, and this is why it's important. They looked at the news articles, and 91% of the stories coming out of U.S. major media outlets, when it came to the virus, were negative. It's bad, it's dangerous, it's negative. Now, for non-U.S. major U.S. sources, that number was 54% of the articles. So the major news outlets, 91%, 9 out of 10 stories are, this is bad, it's going to kill you, oh my God, we're all going to die, or some variation thereof. Whereas the non-major sources were about 50-50. Yeah, it's bad, and maybe it's not as bad as we thought. And this does a couple of things. This one, since fear tends to drive us to action without necessarily taking rational thought, it's driven a lot of people to do a lot of what otherwise would have thought have been foolish things. I'm working on, I have a conference I'm speaking at next week. And one of my sessions, I'm talking about how 2020 was a perfect example of how people did not recognize when their rights were being violated. They were not prepared to defend and assert them. They didn't even know what they were. And that lack of preparation, that willingness to simply accept what people say without not, I don't want to be cynical about it, but, as Reagan said, trust but verify. If you have a trusted news source, you go and verify the data. And, if we look at it, what we have is 2020, we were ruled by fear. The country was run by fear. The states, their governors ruled them by fear. The federal government led by fear. And they all did illegal things. They all did unconstitutional things. They all did illegal things. They all broke the law. And no one said boo, because we were all afraid. Now, we're afraid of COVID, so we submitted to the tyranny, but we're also afraid of standing up. We're also afraid of this idea that, what is it? The stuck up nail that gets hammered. We're afraid. And I understand that. I understand the fear of what's going to happen. And I want to talk about that a little more as you get a little farther on. But the thing we need to recognize is when you look at the news, don't trust it. Trust should be earned, not given. And I'm sorry, the major news, in fact, pretty much all news media have proven themselves untrustworthy. Now, I'm pointing with a really broad brush, and I don't mean everybody in the news, in the news media, and I don't mean all news outlets. But here's what I've found: the media as a whole focused on the deaths and the infection rate, and never put it into context. In other words, when I was young, I did a lot of photography work. And one of the things I like to do, it's called a forced perspective, where you frame the picture in such a way that you distort the reality, right? If you've ever seen a picture of somebody holding out their hand, and maybe the Eiffel Tower seems to be, they seem to be holding it in their hand, or you've ever seen a picture of a toy truck that looks like it's a real size truck, that's forced perspective. That's this idea that you frame it to establish a certain point of view in the viewer's mind. Well, the same thing happens with news. You frame the news to show a specific point of view. You see it with surveys, right? You see the surveys. The surveys are written to elicit a certain response based on how they ask the questions. So what do we do? What do you do if your source of the news, how do you know if it's trustworthy? How do you know if you can trust what's being told you? I have a new saying: if the news media told me the sky was blue, I would go out to check. I don't trust even news sources that I follow. I've talked before about where I get my news and how I get my news, and where I follow, I still double check what they say. I see articles all the time, and the number of times what I do is I scan through the articles, I pick the ones that look interesting to me, I mark them, I go back and I research them later. And the number of times I read the article, I read the headline in the first paragraph, and it sounds like, holy cow, what's going on? And I read the rest of the article, and it's like, no, that's not right. It gets back to the point of, I cannot trust the news media. I will trust certain outlets to a certain extent. In other words, there are certain outlets I won't even follow anymore. I won't, if someone sends me a link, or if another person sends me a link, I'll look at it, but I won't read their output because it's garbage. They've proven themselves that they're wrong so many times. They're just not trustworthy. But even places where it's a little more trustworthy, I'm still going to double check, especially before I make some important decision. So what do we do? I kind of rambled here for a little bit, but let's talk about what do we do. If the news media is not providing balanced information, right? For example, think of last year. How many times did they talk about infections? How many infections? There's the infection number is up, 10,000 in this state, or it's up 100,000 here. And you know what they never told you is what the infection rate was. So, for example, if they came and said there were, if I looked at it and said there's 1,000 new cases of COVID, 1,000 new positive tests. Oh my God, that sounds terrible. 10,000 new cases. That sounds terrible. Let's say 1 week it's 1,000. Let's see the next week it's 10,000. That sounds bad until you find out that the first week, well, they only tested 5,000 people. And then the second week they tested 500,000 people. The numbers have to be put in perspective. So, for example, I'm actually looking at the CDC's COVID website, and they say, "Oh wow!" And everyone focused. There have been over 500,000 deaths in the U.S. that have been linked to COVID. Now, I've already done articles about how the numbers are cooked. If you die with COVID versus dying of COVID, the number of people who have died from COVID, 94% of them had an average of 2.6 other causes of death. In fact, the most dangerous person, I guess I understand that the most at-risk people are the elderly and those with diabetes. For some reason, diabetes doesn't get along with COVID. But that number sounds terrible, right? That's 525,000 deaths. And those deaths are tragedies to those families. I don't want to sound callous, Each and every one of those deaths impacted family members. And I wonder how many of those families actually could had the opportunity to grieve because, maybe the person was in the hospital where their family members able to be with them. It's terrible. But that's 500,000 out of almost 30 million positive cases. That's 500. That's 500,000 out of 30 million. That's 1/60th. Now, does that mean we pay no attention to it? No, but it puts it in perspective. I'm looking at it in the US. Again, they say it's 29 million cases of COVID. Oh my God, 29 million cases. Yeah. The average over at least over the last 7 days. Let me see this year. Okay. This year in since January of 2020. Right. So since before this since the time this began, the total number of cases per 100,000 people is 8,751. So let's put those numbers in perspective. You have a roughly 8.5%, let's call it 9% chance. 9% of the people have tested positive for COVID. 9%. Now, of those 9%, there have been 158 deaths per 1,000 people. There have been roughly one death out of every 60 cases. Why do I keep making this point? Because I'm still seeing people live their lives based on fear. And they have they basically ignored their constitutional rights. Not all of them. There's been a few, and I'm hoping there are many more that we just don't hear about. But there are the Americans as a whole are being ruled by fear. And on the one hand, it doesn't bode well for the future because, well, guess what? We've taught the government that you scare the pants off of us, you can get away with just about anything. But it also gets to the question of a quality of life. If we live our lives in fear, if we live our lives always afraid of what's under what's outside the door, if we're going to spend our lives cooped up, wrapped up in cellophane until we're absolutely sure that there's no chance we're going to get hurt out there, well, then we're never going to get out there. The American spirit stops. It dies when we become so afraid of risk that we refuse to do anything. And what it does is it empowers the people who have found out how to make the rules to dictate to people how to live their life. Let me look at some of the news items I was looking at because these things catch my attention. All right. Where was it? I lost it somewhere. Fauci said, hey, you know what? If you've got a vaccine, if you had the vaccine, you can hang out with other people who've had the vaccine without a mask. You're allowed to. Fear has been used to take away our rights. And not just our rights, the rights of our children. The right to live at liberty has been we have allowed it to be taken because we haven't stood up. We've done nothing to say, I shouldn't say nothing. Very few people have done anything to actually stand up and say, no, I have rights. I'm a grown person. I can make rational decisions. And let's recognize that nothing is without danger. Taking a shower has a risk to it. Driving to the grocery store has a risk to it. Eating burgers and fries have risk to it. But we've been, the fear has morphed into this. Now we're not going to allow people to do things unless we can make sure they're going to be safe. It's whether it's, well, we're not going, teachers aren't going to go back to school because, well, there's a minuscule chance they could get sick. I have a good friend, worked a couple of years as a kindergarten teacher. She was sick all the time. Now, granted, it was usually sniffles and colds and stuff like that, but kids carry germs. People get sick. Every year we have the flu, and every year some number of people die from the flu. Every year people die of heart attacks. Every year people die of car accidents. Unless we start talking about this fear porn, about this focus on the bad things and not putting them into context and not seeing the bigger picture, we slide further and further into serfdom. Because now we have people that are literally waiting for the government to say it's okay, to go out without a mask, to say it's okay to travel, say it's okay to see grandma, to say it's okay to go to the store or to go to the restaurant or to go actually inside the restaurant. We're waiting for government. People are waiting for the government to say it's okay. Government is not king. People don't suddenly become geniuses because they work for the government. Fauci has been wrong, has proven himself wrong so many times, yet people are still waiting on him to say it's okay to go out without a mask. The CDC is a government agency, cdc.gov. It's a government agency. And we're waiting for them to tell us it's okay. That's not liberty. That's not freedom. That's serfdom. And that, in many ways, appears to be what many of the American people have become, serfs. Now, for those people who say, no, we're not going to do this, we're not going to be serfs, we're going to stand up for our rights. We've seen some very interesting outcomes. There's two I like to pick on. There's the lady in Texas who was tased because she was outside sitting next to her mother watching her son play, I believe, a football game or some sort of sport. And she was 20 feet away from people who are not her immediate family. And she refused to be arrested and was tased. And everybody sat around and watched. A couple people took videos. One person said, gee, I wonder if that guy's really a cop. And we did nothing. Well, I believe it was a restaurant up in Buffalo. They came in with the health department, and the guy said, where's your warrant? I don't need. Oh, yes, you need a warrant. Fourth Amendment. You're not allowed to search without a warrant, and it has to meet certain criteria. Where is it? And the sheriff's deputies there say, "Wait, hey, we're just trying to do our job." No, your job is to remove the trespasser. But you see, everybody or at least a lot of people in that restaurant stood up and supported the person standing for their rights. That's the difference. If we're individuals standing alone, you're going to get tased and you're going to get arrested. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Standing up for what is right, having your day in court, especially if you're armed with the truth, if you're armed with the Constitution, there are people that are willing to do that. But when you've got people standing beside you, then there's the opportunity of the strength in numbers to maybe not only make a difference, but not have the same consequences for it. So that's what I've been thinking about lately is the fear porn, the fact that we're ruled by fear, the fact that the American people have become servants. I don't know if they've, I guess maybe Reagan, Reagan was right. Liberty, freedom, um, isn't inherited in the bloodstream. We haven't passed it on to our kids. In many cases, it wasn't passed on to us, or it was passed on in diluted form. And we've taught government that if you scare us, you can get away with just about anything. There's a significant portion of the people who will do whatever government wants if they just scare them bad enough. All right, so let's see. Let's take a look here. I got some things popping up. But from what I saw, the total number of deaths in the U.S. 2020 was compared to that of the last 5 years, not any major jump. Yeah, Bobby, I'm not sure. That if you're talking about total deaths, yes, I believe that is correct, but I don't actually have the data on that. I was looking specifically at COVID deaths. But the one thing I did hear was deaths from the flu was way down because everyone's staying at home. For 100 years, we've had the flu and we didn't stay home. Well, unless you were really susceptible to it. And now, but again, that's what happens with fear. Trucker says, what does SURF actually? SURF is a, think of think of England. Think of the country we came from. You had lords and you had serfs. You had peasants. A serf is someone who they're not free. They're not owned like a slave, but they are servant to a master. So, who wrote it? Road to Serfdom. Can't think of his name off the top of my head. Excellent book. So a serf is basically a peasant, a servant. A serf generally didn't own the land. The Lord owned the land and they worked on it. It's gonna drive me nuts. I had to think about that. Where is it? Road to Serfdom. That was, who wrote it? Hayek. That was it. Okay. Frederick Hayek. I've read it. It's the idea of going from a free people. All right, let's see if this makes sense. You have nobility, you have liberty, living at liberty, and you have servants. We created a country where we're supposed to live free at liberty, and we are becoming servants of government, where the government orders us what to do. We live at the pleasure of those in government. And my personal favorite is I have up on my wall a little certificate from the county that says I have permission to run a business. Chaps my hide. I hate it. What do you mean I have permission? I don't need your permission to run a business. Now, what I do need is I do need their permission to collect sales tax in the state of Tennessee. And to comply with Tennessee law about collecting sales tax, I have to register and pay a tax to register my business so that I can get an ID to collect the sales tax. And then sales taxes, Tennessee doesn't have an income tax. We fund ourselves primarily through sales and use taxes. So, but that irks me. The same way when you had, what do they call them? Not necessary services. You had I'm drawing blanks today. When the COVID, when the pandemic first started,
essential workers.
Essential workers. Thank you. You had essential businesses and essential workers. And that was the big, the chaps my hide, because every worker is essential to someone. Every business is essential to at least one person. It is how they make a living. It's how they put food on the table. It's the people that work there. It's how they make a living. It's how they put food on the table. That is essential to people. And this idea that the government has the gall to tell you you're not essential, you're not important, If you can't make a living, well, that's okay. You just don't matter. I'm sorry if a government official told me that they're fighting words. How dare you? How dare you? You want to know who's not essential? Government is not essential. The vast majority of government is not essential. Let's shut them down. So I get on my high horse for that. All right. So let's see what else we got here. Sean saying flu is being counted COVID. No, actually, they don't count flu as COVID. But think about it. What's the primary splitter of the flu is going about and touching things. You know, there's a myth that people talk about airplanes, and airplanes do not have recircled air. Airplanes do not circulate the air. They're a pressurized system. They draw in air from the engines. Air from outside gets compressed by the engines and then fed into the cabin. And then there's a valve at the back that lets the air out. But what happens is you're in close proximity with people. You're touching things. Someone sneezes into their hand and they put their arm on the armrest, and then you put your arm on the armrest and you wipe your eye. That's how stuff like the flu and the cold and coronavirus spread. Well, by scaring us into staying home, we stopped we all but eliminated the flu in 2020. Do you really think this winter, if the flu comes, when the flu comes back in its normal cycle, you're not going to have people saying, well, we all should wear a mask. We all should quarantine because the flu is dangerous and people die from the flu. We've taught them how to do this to us. Okay. Fear porn. Oh yeah, I know, Christopher. I do not claim to have invented that word. I've heard that word used, and it just caught my attention because it's the idea of fear becoming a licentious pleasure. That we go to get, we go to horror movies to get scared. We ride scary rides for that adrenaline rush, and it's almost like the American people have become addicted to being scared about a virus. So yeah, I don't claim to have created it, but it's to me, it's that interesting idea that not only are there people willing to scare you in order to get what they want, but now we have people that are addicted to being scared about COVID. They look for every new piece of news information. They wait with bated breath on their news feeds to see what the latest scary information is. That's that it's not, the problems are not all one-sided.
I know you didn't create that word. I just wanted to share it. I thought it was a new word, but I just figured that out. Like, oh, it is a real word.
Yeah, well, I don't know if, it's in the Collins Dictionary. I'm not familiar with the Collins Dictionary. I tend to stay with Webster's and Oxford, and I laugh because every year Oxford they usually do some report of the words Oxford has added to the dictionary, and I'm waiting for fear porn to join the list. But yeah, it's cool. Yeah, and Tunnel Lord, you're right. We have new people. I'm glad to see people joining the Zoom call again. I like the fact that Christopher could actually talk. It helps the conversation, because sometimes what happens is with these is I lose the thread as we're going through all this. Just remember, everybody, if you have questions, if you have comments, you have things you want to talk about, pop them in the comments. If you're on the Zoom call and you want to do it, you want to just type it in, that's fine. If you want to have a conversation about it, raise your hand. I think this has the raise a hand function on it. Where do you go? I don't have it, but I think, I don't know. I think there's a way to raise your hand. If I'm wrong, just, pop a note in and I'll be more than happy to discuss it. So let's see. Which is supreme, the Constitution or the Supreme Court? Also, does judicial supremacy exist? You've answered this question to me, but the new people. All right. Tunnel Lord, good question. Okay, let me, and you know, for those people who've been around a little while, you know, I like going back to the facts. I like details. I like to show people what's going on. If you want to know, if you want to know about supremacy, remember Article 6, clauses 2 and 3 of the Constitution. And let me share them. Let's see, share. Bingo. Okay, so this is Article 6. Clause 1 talks about debts, not worried about it. Clause 2. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, notice there's a hierarchy there. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Right? Only laws of the United States made pursuant to the Constitution are also considered the supreme law of the land. So when Congress passes a law that is within their powers delegated to them under the Constitution, that law is supreme over the states. Same with treaties. When the United States makes a treaty within the powers they've been delegated under the Constitution. So, for example, I like to pick on this. The Constitution delegates to Congress the authority to deal with punishments of international law. So if there's a treaty dealing with punishments of international law, that's within a power of the United States. That becomes supreme. Now, the Constitution prohibits a law that infringes on your right to keep and bear arms. So a treaty that is made infringing on your right to keep and bear arms is not within the power of the United States. Therefore, it is not part of the supreme law of the land. So there's a hierarchy. The Constitution, then laws and treaties made within the purview, within the realm of the Constitution. They are supreme throughout the United States. Now, continuing on in that clause, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Meaning, every judge, when they're looking at a case, they look at the laws that are involved. They have to put the Constitution above what their state law says, above what their state constitution says. They have to put laws made pursuant to the Constitution above what their state constitution says and what their state law says. Now, the problem we run into is a power is supposed to exist either in the United States or the states or the people, right? Let's take the ones that are for the people. We'll set them aside for just a second. 10th Amendment says any power not delegated to the United States remains with the states unless it's prohibited by them to the states. So a power either exists with the United States or with the states. So there should not be an overlap. The problem is we have let the federal government create illegal laws, illegal departments, illegal agencies, and we've created this huge overlap. So we now end up in conflict because we are not placing the Constitution as supreme. I'll give you a perfect example. I live in the state of Tennessee. I moved here a little over 5 years ago. Love the state of Tennessee. Love it. Much better than the Empire State. Our state constitution says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but it may be regulated in order to protect public safety. Now, why is that important? The Constitution of the state of Tennessee says my right to keep and bear arms can be regulated, but the Constitution of the United States does not. It says it shall not be infringed. That means when the state of Tennessee tries to regulate my rights, if judges were doing their job, they would look and say, well, I'm sorry, the U.S. Constitution says that person's right shall not be infringed. I have to place the Constitution above what Congress has done, above what the state constitution has done, above what the state law has done. And this shouldn't be a problem, because what the Constitution says is limited to a certain set of things. The powers of the United States are limited to a certain set of things. They're supposed to be, but we're not.
Can I jump in
So-
here real quick, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the Bill of Rights was originally only intended to affect the federal government. So that would have left your Tennessee Bill of Rights, where it said that it could be regulated, in effect. But with the ratification of the 14th Amendment, obviously the intent was to extend that Second Amendment also to restrict states and state constitutions, state law, such and so forth.
There's a legal problem with that, and that's Article 6, Clause 2. Because Article 6, Clause 2 says that every judge in every state is bound to the Constitution, all the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is not separate from the Constitution. Article 5 says any amendment is a part of the Constitution. So I know there's a lot of talk about that, but
I wasn't saying it's not valid. The argument is
Yeah.
completely valid today. But if we go back to, I don't know when the 14th was ratified, but let's say we go back to 1808, then it wouldn't have been valid, because
legally that's not true. If a judge is bound to the Constitution, and the Constitution says that a right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, the fact that it is in a specific set of amendments is immaterial legally. The only part of the Bill of Rights that is limited in its scope is the First Amendment, because it says Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereon. No. The First Amendment is the only one of the Bill of Rights that limits itself specifically, in this case, to Congress. So if I'm a judge and the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and a part of the Constitution says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, that has to take precedence over state constitution. And there's, I haven't done as much research to see if that was an intent and it was just badly worded, if it was a compromise where there were certain people that wanted it to be only the federal government and they couldn't get it through. That part I do not know. But I know legally, right, as the compact says, with the exception of the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, well, the entire Bill of Rights is as much a part of the Constitution as Article 1, 2, and 3 are. And since only the First Amendment limits itself to Congress, then every judge in every state is bound to what the Constitution actually says. And in fact, if you look at Clause 3, Article 6, Clause 3, right below it here, the senators and representatives aforementioned and the members of the several state legislatures and all executives and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall be required. So every elected official, every officer at the state and federal level has an oath of office that includes supporting the Constitution. And it has to be what the Constitution says. Otherwise, the Constitution is meaningless. Okay. Hopefully, that makes a little sense there. Let's see here. I lost my place. Back to tunnel lord and supremacy. What was I point of thinking? So yeah, the supremacy clause, Article 6, Clause 2 says the Constitution is supreme. Laws of the United States only if they're made pursuant to the Constitution. Treaties only if they're made within the powers of the Constitution are also supreme, and that every judge at every level is bound by what the Constitution says. Nowhere in there does it say by the Supreme Court. Now, if you are involved in the Constitution to this depth I am, you'll have heard somebody say, well, Marbury versus Madison is where the Supreme Court assumed the power of judicial review. Well, like a lot of lies, there's just a little bit of truth in there. The court did agree that they have the power of judicial review, meaning when they're looking at a case, they must review all of the laws that impact the case. That includes the Constitution. They also said, listen, if a law is made that is repugnant to the Constitution, that law is void. It is empty. It is meaningless. It's of no value. And they even went to the point of asking themselves, so if I have a law that is repugnant to the Constitution and is void, does that mean I still have to apply it? And they went through the normal legal mumbo jumbo to say, no, it would be ridiculous to assume that a fundamental law like the Constitution, and I think that was a term they used, could be superseded by a mere act of Congress. It's ludicrous. It makes no sense. So the problem we run into is this idea of, you may have heard it referred to as stare decisis or precedent. And there's a generally good idea behind it. In other words, if you are a judge and you're hearing a case on a topic you haven't heard before, you kind of go to what other people, you use other people's resources, right? You go to what they've said, what they've done, and you follow their precedent. The problem is, if I place precedent above what the Constitution actually says, then a judge in that case has violated their oath of office because they're not supporting the Constitution. The Supreme Court is a creation of the Constitution. And nowhere in the Constitution is anyone in the federal government given the final decision on what is and is not constitutional. That power is never delegated to the United States. The power of overturning law is not delegated to the Supreme Court. The power of ultimate review of constitutionality is not delegated to the United States. Therefore, it remains with the states. Why? Because the states are the party to the compact that is the Constitution. So when judges when lawyers go to law school and they aren't studying the Constitution, they're studying constitutional law, which is basically a commentary on the Constitution. It's what judges have said about the Constitution. And if you've ever played the game of telephone, you know what happens when you have a judge which is looking at the opinion of another judge on the opinion of another judge on the opinion of another judge on the opinion of another. That's why we're in this mess, is judges have put the opinions of their peers above their oath to the Constitution, and the people elected by the people, hired by the people to represent us, to exercise our sovereign power in our name, have not held them accountable, and we have not held them accountable for not doing their job. So that was kind of a long way around that. But hopefully hopefully tell the Lord that's the information, because that it comes up all the time. It comes up quite frequently. But the Constitution is supreme. Okay, let me go over here. I got something on YouTube. We have over 950 bases on foil Sawyer. Can you make a guess at how much it costs to run per base? Oy, Michael, I have no idea, but I'm sure it has got to be millions of dollars per base. And again, some probably cost more than others based on their size, based on their geography, based on their the logistics there, based on the cost of in the local economy. It's a lot of money. Now, the interesting thing is the military bases on the military is authorized by the Constitution. Congress can create an army and a navy. They can fund it. It's funny because we have the Marines, which are part of the Navy. We have a Coast Guard, which is kind of a spinoff of the Navy. We have the Air Force, which was a spinoff of the Army. But a military is authorized by the Constitution, specifically an Army and a Navy. And having bases overseas is arguably within the purview of the United States, because, we want to put, we need places to put them. We don't put them in our homes. We certainly aren't going to put them in our foreign nations' homes. But here's what's interesting. Something like 75% of the Western United States is owned by the federal government. And there is no authorization in the Constitution for that to be. I think some states, was it Nevada? I think it's like 84% is owned by the federal government. I'm actually worried less about the foreign soil. Yes, there's a cost involved, but at least it's constitutional, or arguably constitutional. The owning of land in the United States by the federal government, except for forts, bases, magazines, ports, that is authorized by the Constitution. Land for federal buildings, that's fine. I have no problem with federal buildings. I have no problem with the federal government owning military bases, military ports, magazines. That's authorized by the Constitution. But national parks are not. There's nothing in the Constitution about about the federal government owning parks or owning land, except for those things that it was specifically authorized to. So I know it's a lot of money. I have no idea what the impact is. But I'm actually more worried about the fact that the federal government is using federal land to extort states and to extort the people of those states. If you live in the Western United States and you are renting grazing rights or mining rights or drilling rights from the federal government, they're not authorized to do that. That's not an export. That's not an impost. They're not authorized. And there's actually, when I wrote the book on the Constitution study, it's really kind of interesting the way it works. There's a reason why most of the Western U.S. is owned by the United States and most of the Eastern U.S. is not. And as I understand it, when new states enter the Union, when they petition, there's an enabling act that Congress passes and the state has to agree to. And basically it says, listen, any public land in the territory that's going to become a state, the federal government will hold in trust until they dispose of it. Problem is they're never disposing of it. So in effect, you have a territory, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico. Not sure about Texas, but you have these territories. They say, okay, we've got land that's not owned by anybody. It's public land. Okay, federal government, you can dispose of you can disperse it, but they never do. And that's why they own it. And that's why they control it, which is why they control so many of the mineral rights and so many of the grazing rights and the water rights. They've effectively they've run a scam on the territories when they became states, and now they own this land. And again, nobody's doing anything about it. Why are rights to land or homestead not in place? I think I just explained it. The federal government swindled the territories out of the land when they became states. They said, yeah, all right, we'll take the land. We will deal with the land. The territorial government, because you got to remember, a territory was basically run with a government established by Washington. Right. It was when it became the federal government bought a bunch of land. They said, here's this territory. And they set up their own little government. They said, okay, if you're going to become a state, here's the deal. All that land that we haven't dealt with yet, we'll dispose of it for you. And they never did. So it's really funny. I'd love to actually see a map of the United States that actually marks out not simply state legal boundaries, but the actual boundaries of state land. In other words, I'd love to see how much, I'd love to see a map where the federal land was marked out, where, all these Western state borders were based on the land they actually owned, or, that was actually part of the state. So that's my little high horse. All right, let's see here. Let's see. All right, Sean, we'll go for it, man. What's up with the supremacy clause? Or is that what you already talked about?
No. Let me see if I can share my screen. I've never done this before, so.
Okay.
It says host disabled participant sharing screen. Anyways, I was having a conversation earlier this week about the federal supremacy, and that laws that are unconstitutional are void. Even if they're federal laws, a state law can supersede them because that federal law has no authority.
Correct. Because
so
if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's void.
Right. And so it piqued my interest, and I was curious what the internet might have to say about it. And so I Googled what is federal supremacy, I believe is the exact wording I used. And it took me to findlaw.com, where it talks about the supremacy clause. And the article says, quote, the supremacy clause the supremacy clause is a clause in Article 6 of the Constitution which dictates that federal law is the, quote, supreme law of the land, end quote. This means that judges in every state must follow the Constitution, laws, and treaties of the federal government in matters which are directly or indirectly within the government's control. Under the doctrine of preemption, which is based on the supremacy clause, federal law preempts state law even when the laws conflict. Thus, a federal court may require a state to stop certain behavior it believes interferes with or is in conflict with federal law. Now, of course, I know this to be false. I just wanted to point out that this is on the internet and was the first thing that popped up when I Googled it.
And, I use FindLaw sometimes for case references, but notice what they said, right? They said that the supremacy clause it's a clause in the Constitution that says federal law is supreme. Should go back and verify, what does the supremacy clause actually say?
I know, and that was my point.
Right.
But irritated me that it was the first thing that popped up, and it took the quote. So rather than directly quoting the supremacy clause, they chopped it into pieces and says, well, it says that the federal laws are supreme, and then uses a portion of the quote to make their point rather than the whole quote, which would have proved their argument to be false.
Well, let's see. FindLaw is probably run by a bunch of lawyers. They did not study the Constitution in law school. They most likely. I've asked a bunch. When I meet someone who's a lawyer, I generally ask them, "Did you study the Constitution in law school or constitutional law?" I've had one person say they studied the Constitution. Almost all of them say they studied constitutional law. They studied the opinion of judges on what the Constitution says. So they've been taught, because a judge says the supremacy clause says federal law is supreme, you go back to the truth. Now, here's the part I want to, and I got the impression that you understood that. Here's the next thing I want you to think about. In a matter between the states and the federal government, who created whom?
The states. The states created the federal government.
The states created the federal government. So if the states created the federal government, who logically should be supreme over whom?
Logically, it would be the creator is supreme over the createe, I guess. Uh,
Yes.
I don't know how to word that, but
Yes.
yes.
But you're no, yes. The creator generally is supreme over the created or the creation, right? Either way works.
Yes, I
So
like that better.
the Supreme Court, the federal government, the United States itself, the Union is a creation of the states. The very idea, if you go to the website, my website, constitutionstudy.com, and you search for Marbury versus Madison, Marbury v. Madison, I did an article where I actually read the opinion and I went through because I hear this all the time, right? Judicial supremacy, federal supremacy. That is not what the legally binding document says. The Constitution is a legally binding agreement between the states. This is important because you've put information into your head. So if you ever end up in a legal situation, if you ever end up talking with a lawyer or a judge, and they say, well, federal law is supreme over state law. Article 6, Clause 2 says it's only supreme if it's made pursuant to the Constitution. If it's a power delegated to the United States, according to Article 10. Amendment 10. If it is not a power delegated to the United States, they are not legally authorized to exercise it. Therefore, that law is not pursuant to the Constitution. Not only is it not supreme, it is void. And by the way, the two sources are Marbury versus Madison and Federalist number 78. Alexander Hamilton both said that an act of a delegated authority contrary to the Constitution is void. So what you've kind of proven that don't simply take what people say. Don't even take what I say. There's a reason why when I write my articles, I link to where I'm getting my information because I want you to double check me. But that is you're right. You take the average person who doesn't know, who's not familiar with this, and they simply search for it and they say, oh, well, whatever Congress does is supreme. That's not true. And that's why it's why John Jay said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation be free. If we read the Constitution, you would at least read that. If people had read the Constitution before they read that statement on fine law, they're more likely to say, wait a second, that doesn't sound quite right. And that's I have a theory of inoculation. If you read and study the Constitution, you're basically inoculating your mind against these ridiculous, unconstitutional ideas. You're training your mind to recognize when something is wrong and then be able to defend yourself, to assert your rights against such an attack. But so that cool. That I like that. All right. Was there anything else, Sean?
No, that's everything. I just wanted to point out that it was something that I found. It's been irritating me for the last week since I saw it.
I've been doing this full time for a little over 2 years now. It aggravates me all the time.
Well, so I have conversations with people all the time. I'm obviously very passionate about the topic. And so, having conversations with somebody and then you tell them something about the Constitution, they go and look it up and they're like, yeah, but this says, and it's like, but the document doesn't say. And then they want to argue find law versus the Constitution. And you're like, but my law is superior to whatever that is. And it's so irritating.
So I get that all the time. And I like analogies. So the Constitution's a compact. It's an agreement between the states. You can think of it like a contract. It falls under the same types of common law, of contract law. So, okay, let's say you and I, and you can use, by the way, feel free to use this. I use it all the time. You and I enter into a contract. I'm going to build you a house. And we specify in the contract, it's going to be 3 bedrooms. It's going to be 2.5 baths. It's going to be 1,800 square feet. It's going to be made of, this material. I have all this information and it's spelled out in the contract. Now I go and I build you the house. And I say, you know what? You don't really need 3 bedrooms. You don't really need 2.5 bathrooms. So I'm only going to build you 2 bedrooms and a bath and a half. And you know what? I don't want to pay for the material for 1,800 square feet. I'm going to do 1,500 square feet. And I'm not going to use the same material we agreed on because I know better what you really need. I think this is right. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to take me to court. The judge, now what would you do if the judge looked at the contract, looked at what I built and said, you know what? He's an expert. We should listen to what he said. That argument about find law against the Constitution is we made a compact. We the people through our states made a compact. We put it in legal writing, and you're telling me that someone's opinion supersedes the agreement that the people made starting back in 1787. You're telling me laws don't mean anything because the law on paper can be superseded by somebody who writes a legal website. And you have to I like using that because it puts them in the situation. See, if you simply say, well, the Constitution says, and they say fine law says, you're butting heads over which is right. Right? If you change the argument into, wait a second, if we have a compact, if we have a contract we've written, and we've said you can do this, 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 and this, you're telling me that your opinion supersedes what we actually wrote down? You change, you get the by asking a question and asking it that way, you're kind of bypassing their mental defense mechanism to always support what they said, and you're trying to open them up to consider another idea. And once you can do that, then you can start having a conversation that's less likely to be a battle to say, okay, if a contract means what it says on paper, then how can if the contract says one thing and a lawyer says another thing, which one do you want to uphold?
See,
and if the answer
like
is you want to uphold the lawyer, then you don't want to live in a nation of laws. You want to live in a nation ruled by the judicial system.
I always use the analogy of a sandbox. Tell them that when we created the Constitution, we built a sandbox and said, the rules are you can do anything you want so long as you stay inside the sandbox. But you're not allowed to do anything outside the sandbox without asking us first.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask us through amendments to the Constitution. Short of an amendment, the answer is no.
Yep.
And, people seem to have a hard time grasping the concept that the federal government is restricted, not boundless.
But that's because that's not what they're taught in schools.
I know, but you can show them like straight in the document itself, and I mean, there's still so.
Yeah, it is. I'm teaching a class next week at this homeschool conference called Reading, Writing, Arithmetic, and the Constitution. Why studying the Constitution should be, it's a homeschooler conference, and why the Constitution should be as much a part of a basic education as anything else. And the schools don't do it. The curriculum doesn't do it. So we've got to do it ourselves. And that's like that's the elevator pitch for this session. It's going to be Saturday afternoon, I think is when that session is. So I agree. It's the first step is education. Once we start opening the eyes that maybe what they were taught in school isn't 100% correct, that they can actually find out for themselves. It's not hard. It doesn't take a law degree. It doesn't take an expensive education. It doesn't take expensive law books. It's only 8,000 words. It's in plain English. It's pretty simple. You can get 95% of it without any debate at all if you just read it. That's why I focus on education. It's why I focus on reading and studying, because even if um, that person's mind isn't changed, if I can at least get them to look it up and to read it, there's that seed of wait a second, it's that beginning to understand that if, it's funny because when you said sandbox, I'm like, sand moves, but you're right. A sandbox has 4 walls on it, right? That keeps the sand inside. It's supposed to stay inside. Well, what happens when you turn the walls, if the Constitution are the 4 walls on the sandbox, what happens when you turn that into more sand? Right? Now you are no longer rulers over your government. You are subjects to it. You are no longer citizens in a free republic. You are subjects of a federal government. And you really want to see people freak out. You start talking about nullification, state nullification, jury nullification. Oh, people get apoplectic when they start talking about that.
I talk about it all the time, but I don't want to interrupt anymore. And I think Tonal Lord had something he wanted to say. So I appreciate the conversation, though.
Not a problem. Go ahead, Tonal Lord.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not just regular old people. It's also legislatures and stuff, or even House representatives. I was talking to my House rep, one of my House reps, and I was mentioning Federalist Member 78, and her whole thing was like she had this idea that the courts could just kind of smack down any law that they made if they thought something, whatever. Like the whole, there's also a problem with judicial supremacy as well. That's also a big issue as well.
Yeah, it's a very big issue because well, a lot of reasons. But here's the basic misunderstanding. Let's focus on the federal judiciary, because this is about the United States Constitution. But the same arguments would tend to apply, although slightly differently, to state courts. Article 3 of the Constitution starts out with the judicial power of the United States is vested in one Supreme Court and as many inferior courts as Congress may desire to create. Paraphrasing, right? Well, what is judicial power? That's the question. Now, when I did my research on it, judicial power is the power to hear cases. It's to offer an opinion on cases. So here's the 2 things that I like to point out. One is federal courts, and in fact, when we're talking about, again, federal courts don't rule. They do not issue rulings. They issue opinions. You go to any part of anything, what they put out doesn't say the ruling of the court. It's the opinion of the court, right? Because it's a bunch of people and they're giving their opinion on the case. And that opinion is binding on the parties to the case, right? The people involved in that case, depending on whether it's a suit or a criminal case. Criminal case, you've got the accused and the prosecution. You got the prosecution and defense. In a suit, you've got the appellant, or not the appellant. You've got I forget the legal terms for it. The people in the case. It legally applies nowhere else. So, for example, let's take an infamous case. Let's take Roe v. Wade. Do you realize that legally Roe v. Wade is binding only on Roe and Wade? Because the details of that case only apply to those people. So you have a court that issues an opinion in a case that is supposed to be binding only to the parties of the case. Now, as time goes by, we have that telephone effect, right? We change things. It keeps getting repeated and changed. We now have this opinion that courts offer rulings, and because we've elevated stare decisis above the Constitution, those rulings now are effectively law because, well, everybody has to abide by it because that's precedent. They've established a precedent. Everyone has to follow that precedent. We've inverted the entire structure of the judiciary. Now, if you want a very interesting study on that, go and read Federalist Papers number 78. Federalist Paper number 78, Alexander Hamilton wrote that one. And there's a couple quotes I want to pull from it because it's really kind of cool. So let me find it here. Federalist Papers. Where are you here? I'll be glad when they get better internet out here. I love living out in the country, but the internet's not that great. Federalist Paper number 78. Okay. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. All right. I'm going to back up a little bit because I want to put this in context. Okay. Whoever attentively considers the different departments of power must perceive that in a government in which they are separated from each other, the judiciary, from the nature of its functions, will always be the least dangerous to the political rights of the Constitution, because it will be least in a capacity to annoy or injure them. The executive not only dispenses the honors, but holds the sword of the community. The legislature not only commands the purse, but prescribes the rules by which the duties and rights of every citizen are to be regulated. The judiciary, on the contrary, has no influence over either the sword or the purse, no direction either of the strength or of the wealth of the society, and can take no active resolution whatever. It may truly be said to have neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm, even for the efficacy of its judgments. Federalist Papers number 78. Anyone who looks at that espouse a judicial supremacy, read them that. Right? They have neither force nor will. They offer opinions. They have judgment. But again, because the majority of the American people are uninformed about what the Constitution actually says, what it actually created, and how it was designed to work, they are led to believe that because a court says so, that makes it law. Well, from that standpoint, then, according to the Supreme Court, you can be interned if the president thinks that it's for the national safety. You can be locked up in a camp. The case is Korematsu, who sued for being locked up in a camp because he was a Japanese American. In that case, the Supreme Court said, nope, the federal government can lock you up just because you're of Japanese descent. And to my knowledge, that case has never been overturned. Dred Scott was eventually overturned, although it was kind of a footnote overturning it, right? It wasn't touted, but Korematsu wasn't. It's back to inoculating ourselves against bad ideas. It's the first step is that can't be right because the judiciary has no force, no will, no power. Now, what can I do to actually defend and assert the position that says, excuse me, not only is that, it's unconstitutional. What you're basically saying is we are no longer a free country. We are ruled by judges. It's called an oligarchy. We are no longer a republic. We are now an oligarchy where we are ruled by a hierarchy of judges. And the top 5 of the top 9 get to do whatever they want to do because whatever the courts say, that's law. I don't know about you. That I think is scary. That's dangerous. That is the thinking about what it is they're actually talking about and finding a way to explain to them, not simply to argue about what's right and wrong, but to open their minds to what the actual Constitution says, and what are the actual consequences of if what they said were true, what are the actual consequences? All right. Anyone else? I don't see any more questions off the YouTube. I don't see anybody on Periscope. I don't see me get anybody on Periscope, but I don't see any more in the chat room. Anyone else have any? Well, think about them. Let me close out with a couple things. I've mentioned at the beginning. I want to mention at the end for those of you who joined late. I have been invited April 30th and May 1st to a homeschool conference in Spokane, Washington. Those of you who don't know, I live outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I would like to go, but I'm looking for a way to defray some of those travel costs. So if you know of an event or can put together an event or something that would help, that I could do while I was out there to help defray the travel costs, contact me through the website, constitutionstudy.com, or you can contact me through Constitution Scholars if you're a scholar. And let me know. I really would like to go out there, but I got to figure out some way to cover all those costs. I'm sorry, Bobby, you asked about read the Constitution in 30 days. I'm still working on it. I got pulled away through with a couple of urgent items. The book is out there, the ebook is out there, but what I was talking about is doing both an audio book and which I've started recording, and doing a daily mailer. So you could sign up and have that day's chapter of the book emailed to you directly. So I'm still working on it. Like I said, I had some things come up that I had to put on the back burner, but I'm don't let me keep reminding me. That'll make sure it keeps getting put to closer to the top of the stack so I can get to work on it. So that was that. If you haven't already, please head over to constitutionscholars.com. That's with an S, Constitution Scholars. That is the site I set up earlier this year. And it's a place where it's designed to do a couple things. I'm going to put that in the chat room so people can see it. Hope I can type. One is it's a place where people can get together and simply discuss the Constitution, right? There's a group for the federal Constitution. There's a group for each of the states. What I've started doing is when I go through my news feed, if I see an article related to a state, either something that about their Constitution or their government that I think might generate some conversation, I put it in that state's group. So go to constitutionscholars.com. You can register absolutely free. There's no free trial. No, just do it. And it's free. If you do, please join your state group. Please join the federal group and participate, ask questions, get involved. Let's discuss some of these things. I think it's, I think we tend to get isolated, and this is a place where we can get together and we can, find each other, find other people in your state that are also interested in the Constitution. The other part is based around education. So when you register, excuse me, you get access to some free videos, a couple free books, just for registering. Excuse me, a little dry. But there's also, I'm building within that a training program for people who want to really get to know the Constitution, really become Constitution scholars. It's a 3-tiered model. It's a paid model, right? So that you have to pay for. It still runs through that website, but there's a subscription for doing it. The apprentice plan is $5 a month or $50 a year. You get access to more videos, you get access to more content, but it's also where we're starting to teach not only the apprentice level is really about becoming familiar with the Constitution, studying the Constitution. And if you want to learn more, check it out. If you don't want to pay for the service, you want to use a free service, be my guest. That's fine. That's what it's there for. I've talked about Washington. I have an idea that in my county, I'm trying to set up what I call a Knowing Your Rights event. Right now, it looks like it's going to be just like a breakfast with people can get together. Some of you may remember I did a placard on the website called Knowing Your Rights back when, shortly after the COVID craziness started. I'm taking that on the road. So you'll see on the Constitution Scholar website, probably in the next week or so, I'm going to start putting together either both in person and online Knowing Your Rights events. And if you are interested, I'm looking for people for the in-person events. I'm looking for people to be hosts. I'm looking for people to sponsor the event, put on, a location, get people engaged, get local groups and businesses involved in spreading the word so that we can sit down and have a frank discussion about knowing your rights and being prepared to defend and assert them. And you'll see more on the website coming up soon. If you're interested, there'll be a sign up sheet there where you can tell me if you're interested in hosting an event, again, online or in person. If you're interested in sponsoring an event, online or in person. Granted, the onlines don't really have a cost to them, so there's not a lot of sponsorship there. But the in-persons, if we like to find a spot, a hall, or a room in a restaurant where we can sit and discuss this, that would be great. I live, just so you know, I live about an hour south of Nashville, Tennessee. So wherever you want me to go, assume I'm traveling from Nashville, Tennessee, and that'll give you an idea of what's going to take for me to get there. Obviously I'm going to, local is cheaper, but I'll go wherever I can come up with the funding because I think it's that important. I think 2020 has shown us that we don't know what the vast majority of Americans don't know what their rights are. They don't know when they're violated. And if they do know when they're violated, they really haven't prepared themselves to defend and assert them. There appear to be very few people that are really not simply willing, but prepared to do so and do so properly, to not simply make things worse, but to actually get somewhere with it. And I've had some good success with this in some events I've done here. So I want to open that up if you're interested. I think that is all. I don't see any more questions popping up. So again, head to the websites, constitutionstudy.com, constitutionscholars.com, find out more, sign up for the newsletter, get these emails. I'll do another one of these in 2 weeks. I have no idea what I'll be talking about, but we'll figure it out then, and we'll have a great evening. So thank you everyone for joining. I'll see you next time here at the Constitution Study. Have a great night.